We started the series by looking at this amazing scalping robot with more than 90% win rate and a very tight stop loss. We applied it on Forex pairs, namely USD-JPY, GBP-USD, and Euro-USD. Then in the second part, we looked at all the modifications required to run the EA on Bitcoin, gold, and US indices. And today we're going to look at additional filters which we can apply to the EA to tighten the trading even further and potentially make it even more profitable. So with no more shenanigans, let's start. For those of you who haven't watched the first two videos, where have you been? And for those who have, you know what time it is. It's time to get your laptop and start coding. But just very quickly for the newcomers, a very quick recap. In the first part, we coded this EA for Forex pairs, namely USD-JPY, GBP-USD, and Euro-USD. We ran the backtest and found this EA to be performing extremely well with more than 90% win rate with a very tight stop loss. Then in the second video, we did the modifications for gold, oil, and Bitcoin. We ran the backtest and we again found the EA to be more than 90% win rate and with a very tight stop loss. But that's not enough. What we said in the first two videos is that during volatile time, chaotic time, and during news events, especially the important ones, this EA does not do very well. And today what we're going to look at is additional filters that we can apply to the EA to tighten the trading a little bit more. As we go along, you will see what filters those are. Now, these filters are not specific to this EA. These filters you can apply to any EA that you already have. It just provides you the filter to turn off the trading when those conditions exist in the market. So where we ended last time, if I look at the input tab, where we were is that we had the Forex profile, the Bitcoin profile, the gold profile, and the US indices profile. We had the time that we could set for the trading between start hour and end hour. We also had the take profit, stop loss, and other settings for Forex pairs. And then for crypto, gold, and US indices, we defined these parameters as a percentage of the prevailing market prices instead of hard-coded numbers. So this is where we ended up last time. By the end of this video, you will be able to add 3 more filters to this EA. The first one, a news filter. The second one, an RSI filter. And the third one, a moving average filter. Now let's take a look at each one of them. The first one, the news filter. Now we all know for scalping, news can be very good as well if it goes in the direction that you are actually hoping it to go. But most of the time, the market becomes so chaotic during big news events that you have no idea whether the price is going to simply shoot up, simply shoot down, go sideways, go up and then down, and how will it behave? Also, the second problem during the news events is slippage. Normally, the spreads go very high, and also the price moves so quickly that by the time your order is hit, the price already has slid up or slid down more than, 4 or 5 pips. So then you end up getting a position that you didn't really want to get. So in order to avoid those situations, we're going to put a news filter. Now, what we're going to have in the news filter is you can define by a par of the name of the news. So for example, you could say NFP, JOLTS. If I go to tools and then the toolbox, here you can see the calendar. Now you can also write a filter which goes by priority level 1, 2, or 3. So low impact, medium impact, and high impact. But I prefer to do it by name because then I can really specify what news I want to avoid. So for example, if I wanted to avoid this ECB board member, I could just simply use, for example, the word lane from this news and then put it into my EA here as that. And then if it is applicable to that currency, so if I have Euro selected as well, then the news filter will look at that, will look at the combination and will avoid that news. Then I also want to limit this news filter by currency. So only applicable to USD news, Euro news, GBP news, and JPY news. You can add more, you can subtract. And then I want to stop the trading 30 minutes before, and I only want to resume the trading 30 minutes after when that critical period and the crazy period is over. And during that period, I not only want to stop trading, but if there are any pending orders on the server, I want to delete those orders as well. In case of open positions, I will let those open positions run. Then we go to the RSI filter. And again, it will start with whether or not this filter is applied. So you will give an option. So you will give an option to the user to either select it or not select it as true or false. Now for the RSI, it's a scalping robot. I'm not that concerned when I'm applying it to a 5-minute chart, whether the RSI is above 80 or below 20 on a 5-minute chart per se. But if on a higher time frame, let's say 1-hour chart or 4-hour charts, if the RSI is in extremes. So for example, here on the RSI, when the RSI is extremely low on even a 1-hour chart, it's at 12. I do not want to trade here. And now this trade is of course because I have turned off the RSI filter, so this trade is taken. But I actually wouldn't want to take this trade because already the RSI is so stretched that on a shorter time frame, it might not be a good idea to take the trade because it actually might be reversing from here. You could use it on a 1 hour chart. You could also use it on a 4 hour chart. In our example, we are putting it on 1 hour chart. I'm very comfortable with 1 hour chart normally, but you can also put it on 4 hour chart. Up to you. Then you can define the RSI levels on which the trading to stop. I normally prefer to do it above 80 and below 20. Then we go on to the moving average filter. What I mean by that is that on a higher time frame, say 4 hour chart, if the price is too far away from the moving average, then it might be due for a small pullback. And that's not a point where I actually want to place my order. So if this was the high at this point in time, I wouldn't place another buy order here, because even if the price comes back and takes that order, because it is too far away from the moving average, there is a very good chance that the price might actually take a bit of a breather and return a little before going in the same direction. So I'm not debating whether or not it will continue in the general direction of the trend, but I'm allowing for the market to take a small breath and take a step back before continuing in the general direction of the trend. So in these extreme conditions, I would be deleting the order, so I would want to stop. And the way we're going to do it is that, one, we're going to define where to apply this moving average. So I'm applying it on 4 hour charts. And then I'm going to define in percentage of the moving average price itself. So if the moving average is 1, then 3% would mean above 1.03 and below 97. So you will have to calculate what you feel comfortable with. So for example, the price here is around 1.047. So that's around 4.5%, which will mean that the 3% would already be here. But is that far enough already? I normally like to define it as 3%, but you will have to take a look on the chart. Now, on 1 hour chart, 3% would be a lot. On a 5-minute chart, 3% is going to be too much and will probably never even happen. So look at the time frame, look at the moving average, and then just eyeball what levels are you comfortable with and what levels do you think is too far stretched and you might want to avoid trading at those levels, and back calculate what those percentages are that you want to apply. Here in this example, we're going to start with 3% and then you can tweak it up or down to see how you like it. So now that we have seen what filters we're going to apply today on our EA, you know what time it is. It's time to get your laptop, sit down, get a coffee, and let's start coding. So back in MetaEditor, this is where we finished our coding in the second part of the video. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up to the section where we have the common trading inputs. And there at the bottom, I'm going to start adding a few more variables that I'm going to require for one of the filters. Now, the first thing we're going to do is add 2 handles for RSI and moving averages. These are the 2 filters, so we need the indicators for them. The next thing I'm going to add are 2 colors. So when the trading is off, what do I want the chart to look like? I don't want to see it as black. I want to see it as pink or yellow or green or whatever fits your eyes. So I'm going to change the color when the trading is off. And I also want to change the color back again to when the trading is on. Then I'm going to create 2 bool variables, and bool variables are yes or no variables. So they're going to store the value whether it's yes or no. So when the trading is enabled, I want this variable to be true, and when it's not, then I want it to be false. Then the next one is to hide indicators. So I want to give the possibility to the user, so when they're backtesting, if they don't want to show the indicators, they can also hide the indicators in the chart window. And then the last one I'm going to need is a string variable, so it can store text. Because when the trading is enabled or disabled, I want to print something either in the expert tab or as a comment on the chart, something. So I'm going to use this variable for that. Then we go down until we come down to the bottom of our section. And this is where we're going to create our first input group, and we're going to call it news filter. And this is where we're going to keep all of our variables which are related to news filter. So the first one I'm creating is a bool. So it's a yes or a no variable, and I'm calling it news filter on. And for now, the value is true. And this is where the user now has the ability to select whether or not he wants to apply the filter as a yes or a no. And then if I go back to MetaTrader, and now we should have the chart colors, chart when the E is active, hide the indicators, the 3 ones that we applied, and also a filter for news. Coming back to MetaEditor, the next variables that I'm going to define are 1, a separated drop-down. So it's an enum, and if you have followed in the first 2 videos, you know what an enum does. So I'm creating a drop-down here, and I'm calling that enumerator separated drop-down, and I'm putting 2 values in it, comma and semicolon, because I want to give my user the ability to select whether he wants to separate the news names by comma or semicolon. And then I'm using that enum that I have created to create a variable as an input variable, and I'm starting with 0, which basically means comma. So now if I compile and go back to MetaTrader, now I can see that the separator to separate the key news words is comma, but he can also use semicolons. Now that I have that, I can now ask for an input variable and I'm calling it key news, and this is where he can define, separated by comma or semicolon, whatever he chooses here, the keywords for the news is to avoid. So if that keyword appears in the news title, then the system will know to avoid that news. And I'm calling it through 2 forward slashes, keywords in the news to avoid. And now if I compile and go back to MetaTrader, I will see that this variable has also appeared here. And the user can type whatever they want in it. The next thing I want to know from the user is what currencies in the calendar to look at, because the calendar also has Brazilian real, Pakistani rupees, Indian rupees, and all sorts of news. So we want to avoid all of that by giving our user an ability to specify only what news to look for. Then the next thing I'm asking is for the user to define how many days in the calendar to look. But the way that we're going to write the EA is that as soon as the EA finds the next news, it doesn't look any forward. And then we're asking the user to provide input of how many minutes before that news event to stop the trading and how many minutes after that event to start the trading again. And then I'm creating a bool variable again, and I'm saying trading disable news, because I also want to know whether the trading has been disabled because of the RSI filter, because of the moving average filter, or the news filter. So if it is because of the news filter that the trading is disabled, then I want to know, so I'm going to store the value yes. For the beginning, we're going to create it as false because the trading is enabled and it's not disabled. And then I also need 3 more variables that we will see when we write the function for the news filter. For now, I'm just going to keep it as uShort, as a separate code, variable name, then a string, so I can store text, and that's news to avoid. And then date time, where I can store the value of date and time, which is last news avoided, which is self-explanatory in the sense that whatever the last news avoided, whatever time it was, I want to store that time so that then I can see how far it has been since that time. So now that we have all of these inputs, we can then go to the bottom of our EA from last time, just below the trail stop. And this is where we're going to start creating our new functions. So the first function that I'm going to create, whether or not there is an upcoming news. This is a bool function, so it's going to return back true or false. Whether or not there is a news coming, yes or no. We start this function by saying if the news filter on, if it is disabled, if the user has selected it to be false, then we don't want to do anything further, we just return a false. But if it is enabled, then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if there is already a news event that has recently passed and it hasn't been more than 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever the user has defined. And I'm going to check that by saying that if the trading disabled news equals to true, you can write it like that. But if you just leave it like this, because it's a bool function, so it basically is saying that if trading disabled is true. And the current time minus the last news avoided, the variable that we created, where we're going to store the time of the last news that we avoided. If the time between that and the current time is less than however much time the user has defined as the trading to start after the news, is that if the user has set 15 minutes before the trading can resume again, and the time difference between now and the last news is less than 15 minutes, then also return true, because the news is still too recent and we don't want to resume the trading. So in a way, the trading should be disabled. Now, if that is not the case, then we know that the trading disabled news is false. Or if it is not, set it to false. Then we go and we look at the separator. So we create a separator, a string variable, and let's call it sep. And remember the separator that we asked the user to create here. This separator, which is either colon or semicolon. Now we need to check which one is selected. So I'm using the switch, and switch is basically going through the separator and seeing which value is selected. So I'm getting switch, and then I'm providing the value of the variable to check, and I'm checking for in the separator variable. And then I say if the case is 0, meaning if it is comma, then separator that I'm creating here is comma. And then if it is already found the case 0, then it doesn't need to continue. So break this function and go out. But if the case is not 0, then it needs to check whether the case is 1, which will be the case in case of semicolon. And then in that case, the sep variable that I've defined here is going to be storing the value as colon. Now that we know that it's comma or colon, now we need to find out what is the code for that separator, because MQL uses a certain code like 0252, 0357. It doesn't recognize commas and semicolons. It recognizes a code behind it. This is where I'm using this variable sep code that we created in the beginning. And I'm going at a string, get the character value. What is the character value of what? Separator, whether it's comma or semicolon. Now that we have the separator code, I'm going to use the string split function to split the key news. This is string that where we're asking the user to provide us with a string of how many or what news to avoid. And there are in total 9. And what I'm doing here now is I'm telling MQL to take that string and using this separator code, split it and store it into the variable that we created as news to avoid here. And these two brackets, they basically mean it's an array, so it can store more than one value. So it can now store 9 values from that string. And I also want to create a variable, and I'm calling it k, where I'm going to store the total number, because this function is string split. It returns a value of how many, when it is split the string by a comma or semicolon, how many values it got. So the value of k would now become 9. Next, I'm going to create 3 variables. The first one is MQL calendar value, and I'm creating the variable by the name of values, and it's an array variable by putting 2 brackets in front of it, so it can store more than one value at a time. Then I'm creating 2 date time variables where I'm going to store dates and times. The first one is the start time, which will be the current time. So whatever time it is right now, that's the start time. And then the end time will be whatever is the start time, so whatever is the current time, plus convert into period seconds using how many seconds in a day, so using period D1, and multiply it by numbers of news lookup, days news lookup, which is how many days to look up for news. So if it is 10 days, then look for 10 days. So the end date is going to be, or the end time is going to be start time plus 10 days. Then I can fetch the values from the calendar by using the calendar value history function. And I'm saying store the values in this variable that I've just created, values, starting at the start time and then ending at the end time. And for now, the country code I'm just leaving as null, and the currency code I'm leaving as null. We could define it here, but I would rather do it separately. Then I'm going to go through a for function. So as long as integer I starting from 0 is less than the array size of the values that we have stored here, as long as the I is smaller than that, and go by increment of I1, create an event variable, and then get the value of that event. So I'm using the calendar event by ID, and get the value of the event by using whatever is the I. So if it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and get the event's ID and store it into this variable event that I've just created. And then by using the function calendar country by ID, I'm using the event that I've created or stored, get the event country ID and store it into this country variable that I'm creating here. And then I'm saying that if you try to find the string of this currency, because now we have a country, so we can find the country's currency. So for example, USD. If you find that event's currency to be USD, then look it into the news currencies, a string, the ones that we defined here. So whatever is the news event that you have found, look it up and match it with the currencies that we want to look up. And if the value is less than 0, meaning that you couldn't find it, then just continue, meaning go through the loop again. Don't do anything between here and here, come down here and then loop again. Because if it is, for example, Brazilian real, then I don't want to do anything with that news event. So just circle through until you find a USD or Euro or GBP, whatever has been defined. And then if you do find that the currency that you have found in the event is in the list of the currencies that we are looking for, Then start another for loop. And here we're going to create a current event, which is the news to avoid of J, because I've already used the I here, so I need to use something different. So loop through the K again, so these values, loop through that however many you have found here, like 9 in our example. Do the loop again 9 times, every time increasing the value of the J by 1, starting at 0. And every time create a variable called current event, and then whatever news to avoid you have found, put that into the current event, and then the name of the event into current news, and then try to find whether that current event is in the news. So for example, if the total news says US JOLS openings, whatever, or non-farm payroll, and we have said in our news to avoid farm, then that matches. And if it doesn't match, then continue, meaning go to the next loop. Don't do anything below, just run through again and take the next news item to avoid, and then match that with the news, and then take the next item until you find one which matches. And if it does match, then first of all, write a comment saying that the next news is whatever is the currency, so US dollar, and then saying the event name and the time of that event by using the value function, by using the value variable that we had defined here, so that it will appear here that the next news is on GBP. I can hardly read it. It's consumer confidence, and it is on the 25th of October at whatever time. So print it there by using comment. And then if the value time, so whatever is the event, if it's time minus the current time, meaning like if it is at 2 o'clock and currently it is 1:45 or 1:46, then it's 14 minutes left. And if that is less than the stop before minutes, the variable that we defined where we ask the user to provide us the input of when to stop the trading or how far in advance to stop the trading. So if it is less than that, so if it is 14 minutes, while the stop before time is 15 minutes, and that again, because we collected the value in minutes from the user, so now we're converting it into seconds by saying period seconds of period 1 minute. So if it is less than that, then we know that this is the time to disable the trade. So we say that the last news avoided is the values time. So we immediately store the time of the upcoming event into the last news avoided. So then later on, we can then reference and see how much time has passed after the news event. And then we also say that the trading disabled news is now true, so that we know that it is coming out of the news filter and not from the RSI filter or the MA filter. Okay, and then if the trading enabled comment, that variable that we defined where we were going to store the comment, if it's either blank or it's not equal to printed, then we want to change it to trading is disabled due to upcoming news and the name of that news by saying event.name. And then because we have disabled the trade, so we want the function to exit by saying return a true value back for the entire function. Otherwise, return false. And then at the bottom of the function, we again say return false, so that if nothing has happened, then eventually we want the function to return the value of false, that it couldn't find a news upcoming. Let's compile it. So now if I go back to MetaTrader, I can see that my news filter section is completely done. You can select true or false, whether or not it's active. Then I would change this from filters for level 3 news to just filter for news and compile it, because what we are actually doing here is just looking at the keywords within the news and not the importance levels. So whether filter for news, true or false, and then here you can provide by comma separated the keywords, then the currencies within the calendar to look at, how many days to look for, and so on and so forth. Now you cannot run a backtest on this. So once you have written the code, what you will have to do is for a couple of days, you need to put it in a demo account, attach the chart, select the news which are upcoming, whatever are the upcoming news, maybe like 3 or 4 hours separated, and then see whether or not the system performs perfectly, meaning like it should stop trading 15 minutes before, 15 minutes after it should start, it should print a message, and then it should change to next news and the next news and the next news that you have put here. So you will have to do it in a live chart, in a demo account, and there are ways to do it in a demo test as well, but those are extremely complicated and it will take forever to write those codes here. So let's go up again to the top, and below the news filter, I'll add 2 more groups, the RSI filter and the moving average filter. Now for the RSI filter, I'm starting with a bool, again, exactly the same way as the news filter, where I'm starting with an RSI filter on variable and whether it's true or false. Then we have the RSI time frame, and I'm setting it to hour 1 because I don't want to apply it on a 5-minute chart. 5-minute RSI doesn't mean anything. You can apply to the same chart time frame as your EA is applied to. And then what's the lower level and the upper level? I normally like to have 80 and 20, but you can also go 30 and 70, up to you. And then when it comes to the moving average filter, I like to use the moving average time frame as 4 hours, because if the price is too far away from the moving average on a 4-hour chart, that basically gives me a little bit of a feeling that maybe the price is going to take a bit of a breath and might actually reverse a little bit. Now that we have our variables, we go down to the initialization function, and the first thing that we give the user the ability is to hide the indicators on the chart in the test environment. And because we are applying the RSI and moving average indicator in the EA, so we need to create the handles for them. Now I have 2 separate videos which go into details of how to use handles to get the value of indicators in MQL. You can check them out. But this is the way you basically create a handle and then copy the values of that indicator into a variable. So in the initialization, the handle RSI that we have created, we will assign it the value of IRSI by giving the symbol, the time frame, the RSI moving average, and the applied price. And for the moving average, we will use the IMA by giving it the symbol, the moving average time frame, the periods, so 200, 150 moving average, the mode, and the price. Once we have created these 2 handles, then we'll go down to the bottom. Under our news filter, we will create another function for the RSI filter, and this is going to feel like a breeze, this is the entire function. So we create another bool function, so it's going to return the value of either a yes or a no. And we start with exactly the same way as the news filter, that if the user has selected the RSI filter to be false, meaning he doesn't want to apply the filter, then just return, meaning exit the RSI filter function by returning the value false. If he has selected the value as true, then we create a variable RSI, and it's an array variable. That's why I'm putting 2 brackets in front of it, so I can store more than 1 value in it, even though I'm only going to need 1 value. And then we use the function copy buffer to copy the value from the handle RSI that we have generated in the initialization. We get the value of the main line starting on the current candle, and we only ask for 1 value, so only go back 1 candle, or start from the current candle and only get the value of the current candle and store it into this variable that we have created. And then we create another variable, RSI now, and we store the value of the RSI on the 0 candle, which we have stored here, into the RSI now. I don't need this comment. And then we can check for the condition that if RSI now, which is the RSI on the current candle, if it is above the upper level as the user has defined, or it is below the lower level as the user has defined for the time frame that the user has defined, then if the trading enable comment is blank or it is not printed, then make the trading enable comment as trading is disabled due to RSI filter, because we want to differentiate whether the trading has been disabled because of RSI, moving average, or news filter. Now we will do the actual disablement in the OnTick function, but here I'm only going to establish that the trading enable comment is no longer what it used to be, whether blank, printed, or any other value, that it becomes trading is disabled due to RSI filter, so that I can check it in the OnTick function and then disable the trading. And because this function is saying, well, it is either above the upper level or it is lower than the lower level, therefore the value is true or the condition has been met. So I want to exit the function and return the value true back to the wherever I'm calling the function from. And if it doesn't happen, then basically the RSI is within the range, and in that case return the value of false. Then we go on to the moving average function. And this is again very similar to the RSI function. We start with the bool, so it's going to return the value of either true or false, depending on whether the condition has been met. We start by checking whether or not the user has enabled this. So if the user has selected false, then it basically means he doesn't want to apply this filter, in this case return, and just return the value of false. But if he has turned it on, then we create a variable moving average exactly the same way as RSI. Then we use the copy buffer function to copy the value of the moving average from the handle of the main line starting at current candle, only one value, and store it into this variable. Then we create a variable calling it MA now, and we store the value of the current moving average from this moving average variable into MA now by using the index 0. And then we also get the current market price by getting ask through the symbol info double function, asking for the symbol's ask price. And then we can check the condition. So if ask is greater than whatever is the MA now times whatever is the upper threshold, so if it's 3%, then take the MA now, multiply it by 1.03 to create the upper threshold, and then check if ask is greater than that, or if ask is lower than whatever is the lower threshold, so use the MA now and multiply it by 0.97, which is 1 minus the 3%, to create the lower threshold. So now, if any of these two conditions is met, that means that the price is currently above the threshold of the moving average or below the threshold of the lower moving average. And in that case, if the trading enable comment is either empty or it's printed, then make it trading is disabled due to moving average filter. So we're not disabling the trading within this function. We're only getting the value, or basically getting a true back from this MA filter check into our OnTick function to see whether or not it is true, and also getting a comment in the trading enable comment variable that we have created so that we can differentiate where is the disablement coming from. And if none of this is true, then just return false. So that's the end of our MA filter. And now we can go back up to the OnTick function to actually start testing this. So we come back here. Now you have the choice to either write it below the is new bar check, in which case these conditions are going to be checked on every new candle, or you can check it on every tick. For this EA, it wouldn't really make much of a difference, but for some other EA, if you want to check whether or not to enable or disable the trading on every tick, then I would suggest to do it here. Let's do it here above the is new bar, so we're checking it on every tick. So we say if RSI filter, and you can write as like this, that is, if is RSI filter function returns a true value, but you can also write it simply like this, which basically means the same thing. So we're checking that if is RSI filter function returns a true value, or if is upcoming news function returns a true value, or if is MA filter returns a true value, then in all of these cases, we need to disable the trade. And that we do by saying close all the orders. So all the pending orders which are sitting on the server, we delete them by calling our function close all orders, where it loops through all of the orders and closes them. Then we say that the trading enable is false, so the trading is not enabled anymore, so we disable it. And then we say chart set integer, and then we change the value of the chart color to whatever is the chart color trading of the user has selected in the variables above. And then we check if the trading enable comment is not equal to printed, then print trading enable comment. And this we are doing because if it is blank, that means that there is no message from one of those functions. And also if we have already printed, which we are going to do it here, once we have printed, then we store the value in trading enable comment as printed. So the next time when the EA comes here, the value is printed. So it doesn't keep printing it again and again on everything. And once we have printed, whatever is the value that is coming back, so trading is disabled because of RSI, trading is disabled because of upcoming news, or trading is disabled because of moving averages, we print that comment, and then we change the value of the trading enable comment to print it so that it doesn't print again. And then we just exit the function. Now, why do we exit the function? Is because we have already closed all of the orders which are sitting on the server. And because we are returning here, so none of the codes below are going to be run as long as the trading is disabled. So as long as the RSI filter or the news filter or the MA filter is returning the value true, we're going to return from here and we're not going to go below. So the system is not going to do anything. It will just close the orders if there are any orders, and then just return, come back again on the next tick. If the values are still true, again return, and again return, and again return. Then we have to wait for when that condition is not true anymore. So let's say if the RSI was below 20, so when it comes back above 20, so this will become false. If it was because of news coming, so once that amount of time has lapsed, what the user has defined, then this will become false. And once the price comes back into the range of the moving averages that we have provided, then all of these are going to be false. So the system is not going to run this. It's not going to exit the function. So it's going to come here. And if it comes here, then we know that none of the filters are true. And in that case, we start with enable the trading again by saying true. And then we print that the trading is enabled again. And then we set the trading enabled comment to blank. So now when we're checking in the RSI filter or the moving average filter or the news filter, whether or not the trading enabled comment is either blank or printed, it's neither. And then the last thing we do, we change back the color of the chart back again to whatever is the color of the chart selected by the user when the trading is on. So back to black in our case. So this is it. Let's compile it. And we don't have any errors. So now if I go back to MetaTrader, what I will see is we have the entire trading profiles. Now we have the chart colors to be selected. The user can select whether or not to hide the indicators on the chart. Then you have down here the news filters. Then here the RSI filters, and you can choose whether to apply the RSI filter on 1 hour chart, 4 hour chart, whatever chart. And then for the moving averages as well, the same thing. So now this concludes our entire journey of writing this EA. Now there are many suggestions which have come up in the comment section by the followers of the channel. I will compile it together, and if there are enough suggestions, then I'll probably make one more video to go, okay, well, how do you implement those suggestions? As we said already before, the news filter, you cannot test it into a visual test run. You need to apply it in live environment on a demo account for a couple of days so that you can see whether or not the EA is performing how it is supposed to perform. The RSI filter and the moving average filter, you can test it into the visual mode as well. So leave a comment if there's anything in the video which was confusing and not clear, and I might make another video to explain it better. We will come back with a lot more stuff in the future as well, other EAs and other general stuff. We started on the machine learning journey as well, so we'll continue to do that. So until next time, guys, stay safe, trade safe.